The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Willa Whitmore stepped down onto the rutted main street of Veta, Colorado, and felt every pair of eyes in town turn toward her like she was something strange and unwelcome. It was the spring of 1877, and the mountain town sprawled beneath towering peaks still touched with snow, a place where cattle ranchers ruled, and women who owned businesses were about as common as honest politicians. She carried 2 weathered suitcases that held everything she owned, and tucked inside her coat pocket was the deed to the old Morrison ranch, purchased sight unseen with every penny she had scraped together over 5 years of working in Denver hotels and laundries. The air smelled of pine and distant sage, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang out its steady rhythm. But the silence that fell over the nearby storefront porches was louder than any welcome could have been. Willa stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with dark auburn hair pinned in a sensible bun beneath her traveling hat, and green eyes that had learned to hide fear behind determination. She was 24 years old and had spent the last 3 months planning this moment, studying cattle breeding journals and ranching manuals until her eyes ached by candlelight. Her father had been a ranch hand before he died when she was 12, and she had absorbed his stories about cattle and horses and land management like other girls memorized recipes. When her mother passed the previous winter, Willa had made herself a promise. She would not die in a city laundry, breathing steam and lie, growing old before her time. She would have land and purpose, even if it killed her trying. The Morrison place sat 3 miles west of town, accessible by a wagon road that wound through stands of aspen and ponderosa pine. Willa hired a driver to take her out that first afternoon, and when they crested the final rise and she saw the property spread before her, her heart sank like a stone dropped in deep water. The ranch house was a sagging 2-room structure with a porch that tilted at a dangerous angle, missing shingles exposing the roof to the elements. The barn was in slightly better condition, but clearly had not housed animals in months, maybe years. Broken fencing stretched across overgrown pastures where the grass grew tall and wild, and the whole place had the air of something abandoned and forgotten. "This is what you paid good money for?" the driver asked, not unkindly, and Willa heard the pity in his voice. "This is where I am going to build something," she replied, surprised at the steadiness in her own voice. She spent that first night in town at the boarding house run by Mrs. Callahan, a round-faced woman who clucked her tongue when Willa explained her plans. "Honey, old Morrison tried for 20 years to make that place work. Land is too rocky, water rights are complicated, and the previous owner before Morrison lost everything trying. A woman alone has no business attempting what grown men with experience could not do." But Willa had not come all this way to be talked into surrender. The next morning, she purchased supplies at the general store, where the proprietor, a thin man named Hackett, seemed reluctant to extend her credit despite her showing the deed and the modest sum she had left in cash. "Ranch business is risky," he said, stroking his mustache, "especially for someone with no experience." "Then I will pay cash until I prove myself," Willa said, though it meant her funds would run out faster than planned. She hired a wagon and loaded it with tools, nails, seeds, canned goods, a rifle for protection against predators, and fabric to make curtains because she refused to live without some attempt at civilization. As she drove the wagon herself out to the ranch, the morning sun climbed higher and turned the distant mountains into jagged silhouettes against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She passed a few neighboring ranches, including one sprawling property with neat fences and grazing cattle that bore a brand she did not recognize. The work began immediately. Willa had no time for fear or second thoughts. She spent the first week making the house livable, patching the roof as best she could with her limited carpentry skills, scrubbing years of dirt and mouse droppings from the floors, replacing broken window panes. Her hands blistered and bled, and at night she collapsed onto the narrow bed she had set up in the back room, too exhausted to dream. It was on the 8th day that she met Ethan Foster. She was wrestling with a section of fence that had rotted through, trying to lever a new post into the hard ground, when she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Willa straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve, and saw a rider coming up the path. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on foot, and as he drew closer, she could make out details. Tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly beneath his hat. He wore working clothes, denim and leather, and his face was open and curious rather than hostile. "Morning," he called as he reined in his horse, a handsome bay gelding. "I am Ethan Foster. My family's ranch borders yours to the north." "Willa Whitmore," she replied, conscious of how she must look, dusty and disheveled. Her skirt hiked up and tucked into her belt to allow for movement. Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the fence line, looking at the work she had attempted. "You are the new owner folks in town are talking about. I suppose I am." Willa kept her voice neutral, waiting to see what kind of neighbor he would prove to be. "My father sent me over to see if the rumors were true. We heard Morrison finally sold, but nobody expected." He trailed off and Willa stiffened. "Nobody expected a woman," she finished for him. "I am aware I am not what people anticipated," but Ethan shook his head, his expression serious. "I was going to say nobody expected anyone to take on this place, considering its history. Morrison ran it into the ground through bad management. The land itself is good if you know how to work it." Something in his tone made Willa pause. He was not mocking her or dismissing her outright. "Are you saying it can be done?" "With enough determination, the right approach, and probably more money than you have, yes." Ethan looked at the fence post she had been struggling with. "You are going to break your back doing it that way. The soil has too much clay here. You need to dig wide or loosen it up." Willa wanted to bristle at the advice, to prove she did not need help from anyone, but practicality won out over pride. "Show me." Ethan fetched a shovel from her supply pile and demonstrated the technique, working the blade in a circle around the post hole, breaking up the compacted earth. His movements were efficient and practiced, and within minutes he had the hole prepared properly. "Now it will set right," he said, straightening. They worked in silence for a few minutes, Willa holding the post steady while Ethan packed soil around its base. The sun climbed higher and sweat darkened the back of his shirt. Finally, he stepped back and nodded with satisfaction. "That will hold." "Thank you," Willa said, meaning it. "Can I offer you water? I do not have much, but water would be good." They walked to the house, and Willa drew a bucket from the well that she had spent an entire day cleaning out and repairing. The water was cold and sweet, straight from the mountain runoff that fed the underground springs. Ethan drank deeply, then looked around at the property with an assessing eye. "You have a lot of work ahead of you. Are you planning to run cattle, eventually?" "I need to repair the grazing lands first, fix the water access, get the barn in working order. I thought I might start with chickens and a kitchen garden, build up slowly." Willa heard herself explaining her plans and wondered why she was sharing so much with this stranger. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Sensible. You will need help, though. This is too much for one person. I cannot afford to hire hands. I figured as much." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Look, I am not making charity here, but our ranch is doing well enough that my father does not need me every hour of every day. I could spare some time to help you get the critical things done. The barn repairs, the well system, things that take two people or special knowledge. In exchange, when you do get your operation running, you could provide some goods or services we need. My mother is always looking for fresh eggs, vegetables, that sort of thing. Willa studied him, trying to understand the offer. Why would you do that? Because watching someone fail when they could succeed with a little help does not sit right with me, Ethan said simply. And because I watched my mother struggle after my father was injured a few years back before he recovered. Folks helped us then. Seems right to pass it along. There was no pity in his voice, only straightforward practicality, and that made all the difference. Willa extended her hand. I accept, but I keep track of every hour you spend and I will repay it properly. His handshake was firm and warm. Deal. Over the following weeks, Ethan became a regular presence at the Whitmore ranch. He came early in the mornings before the heat grew too intense, and they worked side by side on the endless list of repairs and improvements. He taught her how to properly brace the barn walls, how to read the land for the best places to dig irrigation channels, how to identify which fences needed replacing immediately and which could wait. Willa was a quick study, and Ethan proved to be a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain the why behind each technique. But if Ethan was supportive, the rest of Veta was decidedly not. When Willa went to town for supplies, she heard the whispers that stopped just short of being loud enough to confront. At the land office, when she inquired about water rights, the clerk made her wait for over an hour while he served men who had arrived after her. The banker refused her application for a small loan, citing her lack of experience and collateral, even though she had shown him her deed and her detailed plans. The worst came on a Saturday afternoon in early summer when Willa attended a town meeting about shared grazing lands and predator control. She had every right to be there as a landowner, but when she entered the meeting hall attached to the church, the conversations died, and the men stared at her with expressions ranging from surprise to outright hostility. The chairman, a grizzled rancher named Benton who owned the largest spread in the valley, frowned when she took a seat near the back. "This is a meeting for ranch owners," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "I own the Morrison place," Willa replied, keeping her tone level. "Owning a piece of paper and running a working ranch are two different things, Miss Whitmore. When you have cattle to graze and hired hands to manage, then you can contribute to these discussions. Until then, you are wasting everyone's time." Heat flooded Willa's cheeks, but before she could respond, Ethan spoke up from where he sat with his father near the front. "She is a landowner same as anyone here, Benton. She has a right to know what decisions are being made that affect her property." "Your soft heart does you credit, Foster, but it does not change facts," Benton said dismissively. "That ranch has defeated better men than most. A woman playing at farming is not going to change its luck." Willa stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "I am not playing at anything, Mr. Benton. I understand you doubt my abilities, but I am going to make that ranch work. I will run cattle and contribute to this community, and when I do, I will expect to be treated with the same respect you show any rancher here." She walked out before anyone could reply, her head high, but once outside she had to lean against the building's wall to catch her breath. The humiliation burned, made worse by the knowledge that they had every reason to doubt her. She had no experience, limited funds, and was attempting something that had defeated the previous owner. Footsteps approached, and Ethan appeared around the corner. "You handled that well." "I handled it terribly. I should have stayed and fought for my place at that table. You made your point." Staying would have just given Benton more opportunities to belittle you. Ethan's jaw was tight with anger on her behalf. He is a stubborn old bastard who thinks the world should stay exactly as it was when he was young. Do not let him get to you. Easy to say. Willa pushed away from the wall, blinking back frustrated tears. How am I supposed to succeed when no one will give me a chance? The bank will not lend money, the store will not extend credit, and I am excluded from meetings where important decisions are made. Then you prove them wrong the only way that matters. You make that ranch work. Ethan's voice was intense, and when she looked up at him, his gray eyes were fierce. I have watched you these past weeks, Willa. You work harder than most men I know. You are smart and you learn fast. You can do this, but you have to believe it yourself. Something shifted in that moment, standing in the shadow of the church with the sound of voices drifting from the meeting inside. Willa saw past Ethan's practical assistance to the man beneath, someone who believed in her when the rest of the world had already written her failure. And she realized with a start that she had begun to look forward to his morning arrivals, to the easy conversations they shared while working, to the way he listened when she talked about her plans as if her dreams were not only possible but inevitable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For standing up for me in there. You did not have to." "Yes, I did." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with ranching or neighborly assistance. Then he cleared his throat and looked away. "Come on, I will drive you back. We can get a few more hours of work in before dark." As summer deepened, the ranch slowly began to transform. The house no longer leaked when it rained. The barn stood sturdy and ready for animals. Willa planted a large garden that flourished in the mountain soil, and she acquired a dozen chickens that provided eggs and entertainment with their busy clucking. She learned to shoot accurately with the rifle, bringing down rabbits for her table and discouraging a coyote that had been prowling too close to her chicken coop. And through it all, Ethan was there. He brought his expertise and his labor, but more than that, he brought his faith in her ability to succeed. When she made mistakes, he helped her understand what had gone wrong without making her feel foolish. When she achieved something difficult, his praise was genuine and made her glow with pride. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their lives. Ethan had grown up on the ranch, the youngest of 3 brothers, and had learned the cattle business from his father. His 2 older brothers had gone off to seek their fortunes in Denver and San Francisco, but Ethan loved the land and the life too much to leave. Willa told him about her father's stories of ranching, about her mother's quiet strength, about the years in Denver that had felt like slowly suffocating. "I used to look at the mountains from the city and feel like I was in prison," she confessed one day while they were reinforcing the irrigation channels. "I knew there was a bigger life out there if I just had the courage to reach for it." "Takes more than courage to do what you are doing," Ethan said. "Takes vision and stubbornness and a willingness to endure people telling you it cannot be done." "Does it get tiring being so relentlessly encouraging?" Willa asked, but she was smiling. "Does it get tiring being so determined to do everything the hardest way possible?" he countered, and she laughed. But not everything was progress and growing affection. In late July, disaster struck. Willa had finally saved enough to purchase 3 young cows, heifers that would form the foundation of her future herd. She had prepared carefully, ensuring the pasture was ready and the fencing secure. The seller was a rancher from over the mountain pass who had a reputation for fair dealing, and Willa paid him most of her remaining cash for the animals. 3 days after the cows arrived, 2 of them sickened and died within hours of each other. The third was clearly ailing, lying in the pasture and breathing shallowly. Willa rode into town desperately seeking a veterinarian, only to be told the closest was 2 days away. By the time she returned to the ranch, the third cow was dead. She found Ethan there, having come for their usual work session, and discovered the tragedy. He was examining the dead animals, his expression grim. "This does not look like disease," he said. "See here. The foam around the mouth, the way they are lying, I think they were poisoned. Poisoned." Willa felt the world tilt. "How? I have been so careful." Ethan led her to the water trough and pointed to some wilted plant material floating in the water. "Looks like water hemlock. Grows along stream beds. A small amount is deadly to cattle. Someone must have put it in your trough." The implications crashed over Willa like a physical blow. "You mean someone deliberately killed my cattle?" "I do not want to believe it, but I cannot see how else this much hemlock ended up in your trough. You do not have any growing on your property. I have walked every acre with you." Rage and despair warred inside Willa. 3 cows represented nearly everything she had worked for, months of savings and careful planning destroyed in an instant. Who would do this? Could be someone who wants you to fail. Could be someone who wants to buy your land cheap after you give up. Ethan's voice was hard. "Either way, it is criminal and we should report it to the sheriff." But when they rode to town and explained what had happened, Sheriff Drummond was less than helpful. He was an older man, friends with many of the established ranchers, and his skepticism was obvious. "You are saying someone snuck onto your property and poisoned your water supply. That is a serious accusation, Miss Whitmore. You have any proof beyond dead cattle and some weeds?" "The hemlock did not get there by accident," Ethan said sharply. "There is none growing near her water sources. Could have blown in on the wind, could have been carried by an animal, could be a lot of things." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "I cannot go around accusing folks of crimes based on what might have happened. You got evidence, you bring it to me. Otherwise, I suggest you take better care of your livestock." Walking out of the sheriff's office, Willa felt utterly defeated. "I cannot continue this way. Every step forward, something pushes me 3 steps back. Maybe everyone is right. Maybe I should sell and cut my losses." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Willa, look at me. Do not let them win. That is exactly what someone wants, for you to give up and disappear. I have no money left to replace those cows. The ranch cannot sustain itself without livestock. I have failed. You have not failed. You have had a setback, a terrible one, but it is not over." Ethan's intensity pulled her back from the edge of despair. "Listen to me. I have been talking to my father. We will lend you 3 heifers from our herd. On credit you can repay once your ranch is producing. You are too close to give up now." Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. "Why are you doing all this? You barely know me." "I cannot possibly repay everything you have done." "Maybe I am not doing it for repayment," Ethan said quietly. His hands were still on her shoulders, warm and steady, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Maybe I am doing it because I believe in you. Because I have watched you work yourself to exhaustion day after day and never complain. Because you are braver than anyone I have ever met. Because somewhere along the way, helping you stopped being about being a good neighbor and became about something else entirely." The world seemed to narrow to just the 2 of them, standing on the dusty street with the late afternoon sun gilding everything gold. Willa could hear her heartbeat in her ears, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Something else," she whispered. "I am falling in love with you, Willa," Ethan said, the words simple and devastating. "Have been for weeks now, maybe from the first day I saw you determined to wrestle that fence post into submission. I know the timing is terrible and you have enough to deal with, but I cannot keep pretending this is just about ranching anymore." She should have been surprised, should have needed time to process this revelation. But instead, It felt like something she had known on some level for a long time. All those mornings working side by side, all those conversations and shared meals, all those moments when their eyes met and held just a little too long. "Ethan," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know, needed you to understand why I am not going to let you give up. You are too important." Willa reached up and placed her hand over one of his, still resting on her shoulder. "What if I wanted to say something? What if I wanted to tell you that somewhere between learning to dig proper irrigation channels and rebuilding the barn, I started looking forward to seeing you every morning more than I looked forward to anything else? What if I told you that I think I am falling in love with you too?" The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like sunrise, transforming his serious features into something radiant. "Then I would say we have very good timing after all." He kissed her there on the street, gentle at first and then deeper when she responded, her hands gripping his shirt to pull him closer. It tasted like hope and promise, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected but both desperately wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We are going to make this work. The ranch, us, all of it, I promise you." "Together," Willa said, and the word felt like a revelation. With Ethan's family's help, Willa received 3 quality heifers and a young bull, enough to start building a proper herd. The Fosters asked for nothing but eventual repayment in kind, whenever Willa's operation was stable enough to provide it. Ethan's father, Jacob Foster, came to inspect Willa's ranch himself, and offered suggestions for improvements with the authority of 30 years of experience. His mother, Catherine, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, brought Willa preserves and bread and told her that any woman brave enough to tackle the Morrison place deserved support, not obstacles. The poisoning incident had shaken Willa badly, but it also hardened her resolve. She installed locks on her barn and began sleeping with the rifle close at hand. Ethan started spending nights in the barn when he could, watching over the cattle, and on those nights Willa would bring him coffee and they would sit together in the hayloft talking until the stars wheeled overhead. "Do you think we can really build something here?" she asked him one night, her head resting on his shoulder. They had not yet discussed marriage or the future beyond the immediate challenges, but the question hung unspoken between them. "I think you already have," Ethan replied. "Look at what you have accomplished in just a few months. The garden is producing enough to sell vegetables in town. Your chickens lay more eggs than you can use. The cattle are healthy and thriving. Every week, this place looks more like a real ranch and less like a broken dream. But the town still sees me as a failure waiting to happen. Benton and his friends, the sheriff, even Hackett at the store treats me like I am playing make-believe." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what will change their minds? Success. Not words, not arguments, just undeniable success. When your cattle are fattened and ready for market, when you are turning a profit, when you are contributing to the town's economy, they will have to accept you. It might stick in their throats, but they will have to acknowledge you earned your place." He was right, Willa knew. The only way forward was through, continuing to work and build and prove herself day by day. But it helped immeasurably to have Ethan beside her, believing when her own faith wavered. As summer faded into autumn, the ranch continued to develop. Willa hired a drifter looking for short-term work to help her harvest hay from the upper pastures, storing it in the barn for winter feed. She sold eggs and vegetables to the boarding house and to some of the families in town, slowly building a reputation for quality produce. The cattle grazed contentedly, growing fat on the good mountain grass, and her relationship with Ethan deepened into something solid and real. They did not hide their affection when they were in town together, though it provoked raised eyebrows and gossip. Ethan made it clear to anyone who asked that he was courting Willa Whitmore and intended to marry her. Scandal be damned. Willa found herself daydreaming about what a life together might look like, their ranches merged or working cooperatively, children running through the pastures, growing old together with the mountains as their witnesses. But not everyone was pleased by developments. In October, as Willa was preparing to take her first cattle to market, disaster threatened again. She discovered that someone had filed a complaint with the land office, claiming that her deed was fraudulent and that she had never properly registered her ownership. It was a baseless claim, but it tied up her paperwork and threatened to prevent her from legally selling cattle until the matter was resolved. Willa made the long ride to the county seat with Ethan accompanying her, and they spent 3 frustrating days navigating bureaucracy and proving what she already knew. Her deed was legitimate, properly registered, and all fees had been paid. The clerk who had filed the complaint was reprimanded, and Willa finally received the documentation she needed. But the delay cost her the best market window. By the time she got her cattle to the sale, prices had dropped, and she made only a modest profit instead of the substantial one she had counted on. "Someone is working against me deliberately," she said on the ride back to Veta, exhausted and disheartened. "The poisoning, now this. They are trying to bleed me dry bit by bit. Then we find out who and we stop them," Ethan said grimly. "My father has been asking around quietly. There are rumors that Benton has been buying up struggling ranches, consolidating land. He made an offer for your property right after Morrison left, but Morrison sold to you instead for less money. You think Benton is behind this. I think he is someone with motive and resources, but we need proof before we can confront him." The proof came from an unexpected source. One of the ranch hands who worked for Benton, a young man named Davis, came to Willa's property late one evening looking troubled. Ethan was there, and they invited Davis into the house. He sat at the kitchen table twisting his hat in his hands, clearly nervous. "I cannot stay long, but I had to tell someone. Benton has been talking about your place, Miss Whitmore. He sent me and another hand to your property a few weeks back, told us to make sure your cattle got into some bad plants." I did not know what he meant at the time, but then later I heard about your cows dying and I realized what we had done. Willa felt cold fury wash through her. "You poisoned my cattle. I am sorry. I swear I did not understand what I was doing. Benton said it was just a prank, said you needed to be taught you could not handle ranching. But killing animals, that is not right. And now he is talking about burning your hay stores this winter. Make sure you cannot feed your stock." Davis looked miserable. "I cannot be part of that. I quit today, and I am leaving the territory, but I wanted you to know what he is planning." "Will you testify to the sheriff?" Ethan asked. Davis shook his head. "Benton has friends everywhere, including the law. I say anything official and I will wind up in a ditch somewhere. But I wanted to warn you so you could protect yourself." After Davis left, Willa and Ethan sat in the darkened kitchen discussing options. Going to the sheriff seemed pointless given his previous dismissal and his connections to Benton. Taking the matter to a judge would require proof beyond the word of a ranch hand who had already fled, but doing nothing meant leaving herself vulnerable to further sabotage. "I have an idea," Ethan said slowly, "but you are not going to like it." His plan was risky. They would set a trap, making it appear that Willa was leaving the ranch unattended for several days to visit family, creating an opportunity for Benton to make his move against the hay barn. Meanwhile, Ethan and several trusted friends would watch the property, and if Benton or his men showed up to cause damage, they would catch them in the act with witnesses. This could go very wrong, Willa said. If he brings enough men, there could be violence. We will have numbers on our side and the element of surprise. But you are right, there is risk. Ethan took her hands. If you want to take this to the territorial authorities instead, we can try that route. It will take longer and might not work, but it is safer. Willa thought about the months of struggle, the cattle that had died, the constant pressure and sabotage. She thought about all the women who might come after her, trying to make their own way, and how her failure would be used to justify keeping them down. We set the trap. They planned carefully. Willa made a show of packing bags and mentioning to several people in town that she would be visiting a cousin in Pueblo for a week, leaving her ranch closed up. The night she was supposed to leave, she instead rode to the Foster Ranch where she would stay hidden while the plan unfolded. Ethan assembled a group of 5 men he trusted completely. His father, his older brother who had returned for a visit, and 3 ranch hands who were loyal to the Foster family. They positioned themselves around Willa's property as darkness fell, hidden but with clear views of the barn and hay storage. 2 nights passed with nothing happening. On the 3rd night, as the moon rose late and small, they heard horses approaching. 4 riders came up the road with no lanterns, moving quietly. They dismounted near the barn and one of them produced a torch. Ethan recognized Benton's bulky frame and one of his senior ranch hands. What happened next unfolded quickly. As Benton's man moved to light the hay on fire, Ethan and his group emerged from hiding with rifles ready. "I would not do that if I were you," Ethan called out, his voice carrying in the still night. Benton spun around, his expression twisting from surprise to rage when he saw he was outnumbered. "Foster, I should have known you would be behind this. You are trespassing on private property with clear intent to commit arson. We have witnesses." Ethan gestured to his companions, all of them armed and ready. "You are done, Benton. You have no proof of anything." "We were just riding by and stopped to investigate. Thought we saw something suspicious. With a torch and kindling. Try that excuse with the sheriff." Jacob Foster stepped forward, his weathered face hard. "I have tolerated your land grabbing and your bullying because you kept it mostly legal. But this crosses a line. We are taking you into custody and bringing the territorial marshal into this." Benton made a move toward his gun, but found himself staring down 6 rifle barrels and thought better of it. His men surrendered without resistance, clearly unwilling to die for their employer's schemes. The ride back to town was tense, with Benton blustering and threatening lawsuits and consequences. But when they arrived at the sheriff's office and the whole story came out, including Davis's testimony which Ethan had gotten the young man to commit to paper before he left, the evidence was overwhelming. The sheriff, seeing which way the wind was blowing and not wanting to be dragged down with Benton, suddenly became very interested in upholding the law. The territorial marshal arrived within the week and conducted a thorough investigation. It turned out that Benton's schemes went deeper than anyone had realized. He had been systematically sabotaging smaller ranchers for years, forcing them to sell their land cheap, then consolidating it into his growing empire. Willa had just been the latest target. With multiple victims coming forward once Benton's activities were exposed, the case against him became ironclad. Benton was arrested and tried, eventually sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison for arson, conspiracy, and fraud. His ranch was broken up, with some properties returned to previous owners who had been cheated, and the rest sold to pay his legal debts and restitution. The scandal sent shockwaves through Veta. Suddenly, Willa found herself transformed from the object of doubt to something else entirely. People who had dismissed her now sought her out to apologize or to express admiration for her courage in standing up to Benton. The banker who had refused her loan came to her ranch personally to offer credit terms. Hackett at the general store extended her a line of credit without being asked. But the most profound change was in how the other ranchers treated her. At the next community meeting in December, when Willa entered the hall, the chairman welcomed her by name and made space for her near the front. Benton was gone, and with him the toxic influence that had poisoned the community's attitude. Ranchers who had sneered now nodded respectfully. Some even sought her advice on matters where her fresh perspective and book learning gave her insights they lacked. "You have done something remarkable," Catherine Foster told her over dinner at the Foster Ranch one evening. "You have not just survived, you have changed this town. Young women are going to hear your story and know they can do things that seemed impossible." Willa felt overwhelmed by the praise, still adjusting to her new status. But what mattered most was sitting beside her. Ethan, whose faith had never wavered, whose support had made the difference between failure and success. As winter settled over the mountains, blanketing the valley in snow, Willa's ranch settled into a rhythm. Her cattle were healthy and growing, her finances were stabilizing, and her reputation was secure. And on a clear December night, with stars scattered like diamonds across the black sky, Ethan came to her door with something besides work advice on his mind. "Walk with me," he asked, and Willa bundled into her heavy coat. They walked through the snow-covered pastures, their breath misting in the cold air, until they reached the fence line where they had first met. Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I have been thinking about timing," he said. "About how things happen when they are meant to, even if it does not seem like the right moment. I did not plan to fall in love with you when I rode over here last spring. I thought I was just being a good neighbor." "I know the feeling," Willa said softly. "But now I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You have become essential to me, Willa. Your strength, your determination, your refusal to accept limitations, the way you see possibilities where others see only obstacles. I love all of it. I love you." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards, but we have been through more together than most couples experience in years. Will you marry me?" The ring inside the box was simple, a gold band with a small sapphire that caught the moonlight. It was perfect, and Willa felt tears sting her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, absolutely yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with the tender passion that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling so hard their faces hurt. "I was terrified you might say it was too soon," Ethan admitted. "It probably is too soon by what people expect," Willa replied. "But nothing about us has been conventional. Why start now?" They married in February, in the small church in Veta with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Willa wore a dress of cream silk that Catherine Foster had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers preserved from the previous summer. Ethan wore his best suit and could not stop grinning as she walked down the aisle toward him. Jacob Foster stood as Ethan's best man, and Mrs. Callahan from the boarding house stood with Willa. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. The reception afterward at the town hall featured food and music and dancing, and even the most conservative members of the community seemed genuinely happy for the couple. "You have given this town a story to tell," the new chairman of the Ranchers Association said to Willa during the reception. The woman who would not quit and the man who stood beside her. It is something folks will remember. But for Willa, the sweetest moment came late in the evening when she and Ethan slipped away from the celebration and rode back to her ranch. Their ranch now, they had decided. They would combine operations, with Ethan bringing his expertise and some cattle from his family's herd, building something together that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. Standing on the porch of the house she had worked so hard to restore, looking out at the moonlit pastures where her cattle grazed peacefully, Willa felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. "I did it," she said wonderingly. "I actually did it." Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We did it, and this is just the beginning." The first years of their marriage were busy and productive. They expanded the cattle operation, adding a breeding program that gained a reputation for quality stock. Willa's instinct for bloodlines combined with Ethan's practical experience created something special, and ranchers from across Colorado began seeking out Whitmore foster cattle. The ranch prospered, and with prosperity came expansion. They added more pasture land, purchased equipment, hired reliable hands to help with the work. Willa discovered she had a talent for the business side of ranching, negotiating contracts and managing accounts, with the same determination she had brought to physical labor. Ethan handled the day-to-day operations, working alongside the hired men, never asking anyone to do something he would not do himself. In the autumn of 1879, Willa gave birth to their first child, a son they named Henry Jacob after both grandfathers. She took to motherhood with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything else, though she refused to abandon the ranch work entirely. She could often be seen in the weeks after Henry's birth with the baby strapped to her back in a sling while she inspected cattle or worked in her expanded gardens. "You are going to spoil that boy, teaching him about ranching before he can even walk," Catherine Foster teased, but there was approval in her eyes. "He is going to grow up knowing that his mother built something from nothing," Willa replied, "and that his father had the courage to believe in her when no one else would." The town had fully embraced Willa by then. She served on the school board, helped organize community events, and was frequently consulted on matters of business and property. When a young widow sought advice about whether she could run her late husband's freight company, Willa spent hours with her, sharing everything she had learned about operating in a male-dominated world. "You told me once that I had changed the town," Willa said to Catherine during one of their regular visits. "But I think the town changed me too. I came here angry and defensive, ready to fight everyone. I learned that while some people will always doubt you, others will surprise you with their support if you give them the chance." "You earned that support through hard work and integrity," Catherine replied, "but you are right that you have grown." The difference between the defensive young woman who arrived on that stagecoach and the confident person you are now is remarkable. In 1881, Willa and Ethan had a daughter, Grace Catherine, named for both grandmothers. Grace was born with her mother's red hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the beginning, she showed signs of inheriting her parents' stubborn determination. Where Henry was methodical and thoughtful, Grace was bold and adventurous, climbing out of her crib before she was 2 and giving her parents regular heart attacks with her fearlessness. "She is definitely your daughter," Ethan said one evening after rescuing Grace from climbing onto the fence rail to pet the horses. "My daughter. She gets her recklessness from you," Willa countered, but she was smiling. The ranch continued to grow and thrive. By the mid-1880s, the Whitmore Foster spread was one of the most respected operations in southern Colorado. They ran several hundred head of cattle, maintained prize breeding stock, and had diversified into horses as well, with Ethan developing a reputation for training quality working animals. But success did not make them complacent. Willa remained actively involved in the business, though she also made time for community leadership. She was instrumental in establishing a school for the valley's children, contributing both funds and political pressure to get it built. She advocated for fair labor practices for ranch hands, earning her some criticism from other owners, but also fierce loyalty from workers. "You cannot save everyone or fix every problem," Ethan told her gently when she came home frustrated after a contentious ranchers' meeting where she had argued for better wages. "I know that, but I can try to make things better than how I found them. I was given a chance when I should not have had one. The least I can do is extend those chances to others." As their children grew, the ranch became a place where both kids learned the value of hard work alongside the importance of fairness and compassion. Henry showed an aptitude for the business side, following his mother around and asking endless questions about breeding records and market prices. Grace preferred to be outside with the animals, and by age 7, she could rope a calf as well as many of the ranch hands. In 1887, Willa received a letter that brought unexpected news. A newspaper in Denver wanted to write a feature story about her, part of a series on successful female entrepreneurs in the West. She was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but Ethan encouraged her to do it. "Your story matters," he said. "Not just for you, but for every woman who is told she cannot do something. Let them hear about what you accomplished." The resulting article, published in the Denver Tribune, painted Willa as a pioneering figure, a woman who had overcome skepticism and active sabotage to build a thriving ranch. It detailed the challenges she had faced and how Ethan's support had made the difference. The story spread, reprinted in newspapers across the West, and Willa found herself receiving letters from women all over the country asking for advice or simply thanking her for proving it could be done. "I never set out to be an inspiration," Willa said, reading through the stack of letters one evening. "I just wanted to survive and build a life." "That is exactly why you are inspiring," Ethan replied. "You did not do it for glory or recognition. You did it because you refused to accept the limitations others tried to put on you." The article also prompted an unexpected visit. A young woman named Sarah appeared at the ranch one summer day in 1888, traveling alone from Wyoming. She was 19 years old and had inherited a small ranch from her uncle, and she was terrified of failing. "I read about you in the newspaper," Sarah explained over coffee in Willa's kitchen. "I know it is presumptuous to just show up, but I had to meet you. Everyone back home is telling me I should sell the ranch, that I cannot possibly run it alone. I need to know if what you did is really possible." Willa looked at this young woman who reminded her so much of her younger self and felt a surge of determination. "It is possible, but it is not easy. You will work harder than you ever have in your life. You will face people who doubt you and some who actively try to stop you. But if you are truly committed, if you are willing to learn and adapt and push through the setbacks, then yes, you can do it." Sarah stayed for 2 weeks, learning everything she could from Willa and Ethan. They shared their hard-won knowledge freely, from practical ranching techniques to strategies for dealing with hostile bankers and doubting neighbors. When Sarah left, she carried with her not just information but renewed confidence. "I feel like I just watched myself 10 years ago," Willa said to Ethan as they watched Sarah's wagon disappear down the road. "You gave her something invaluable. You showed her it is possible." As the 1880s drew to a close, the Whitmore Foster Ranch was firmly established as a fixture of the valley. The children were growing into capable young people. Henry, at 10 years old, was already keeping detailed records of the herd and could calculate profit margins in his head. Grace, at 8, could ride better than most adults and had declared her intention to raise horses when she grew up. Willa and Ethan sat on their porch one evening in the spring of 1890, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had witnessed their entire journey together. 13 years had passed since that dusty day when Willa had stepped off the stagecoach, and the transformation was almost impossible to believe. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Choosing this life with all its challenges?" Willa reached over and laced her fingers through his. "Not for a single moment. This is everything I dreamed of and more than I dared to hope for. Even when Benton was poisoning your cattle and the whole town thought you would fail, even then, because that is when I learned what I was really made of. And when I learned that the right partner makes all the difference." She turned to look at him, this man who had stood beside her when he had no reason to, who had believed in her when belief was the hardest thing to hold on to. "You made me brave, Ethan. You gave me the courage to keep going when I wanted to give up. You were already brave. I just reminded you of it when you forgot." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the deepening sky. The sounds of the ranch drifted around them. The lowing of cattle, the nicker of horses in the barn, the distant laughter of their children playing in the house behind them. Everything they had built together, brick by brick and day by day. In 1893, Willa was elected to the town council, the first woman to hold such a position in Veta. She served with distinction, bringing the same practical determination to municipal matters that she had brought to ranching. She advocated for improved roads, better schools, and fair treatment of workers, and while she did not win every battle, she won respect even from those who disagreed with her. The ranch continued to expand modestly, though Willa and Ethan were careful not to become the kind of land barons they had fought against. They paid fair wages, treated their workers with dignity, and shared their knowledge with neighboring ranchers rather than hoarding it. This approach built networks of cooperation rather than competition, and the whole valley prospered as a result. Henry went off to college in 1896 to study agriculture and business, planning to return with knowledge that would help modernize the ranch. Grace, at 14, was already competing in rodeo events and catching the attention of horse buyers with her skill in training young animals. A third child, Thomas, born in 1885, was quieter than his siblings but showed a remarkable talent for working with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse or cow with his patient presence. As the century turned, Willa and Ethan found themselves grandparents when Henry returned from college with a wife, and soon after, a daughter of his own. The ranch that Willa had fought so hard to establish now supported 3 generations, with room to grow. On a crisp autumn morning in 1900, Willa stood in the same spot where she had first surveyed the broken-down Morrison place 23 years earlier. The transformation was complete. Where there had been collapsing buildings, now stood sturdy structures of good timber and stone. Where there had been overgrown pastures, now grazed healthy cattle bearing the Whitmore Foster brand. Where there had been despair and defeat, now there was prosperity and hope. Ethan came up behind her, his hair now touched with gray at the temples, his face lined by years of weather and hard work but still handsome to her eyes. Thinking about old times, thinking about how far we have come, how far we brought each other. "You know, folks in town talk about you like you are some kind of legend, the woman who would not quit, who proved everyone wrong." Ethan wrapped his arms around her. "But to me, you are just Willa, the woman I fell in love with while helping her wrestle fence posts into rocky ground. Just Willa." "I like that." She leaned back against him, solid and warm and constant as he had been for more than 2 decades. "We built something good here, did we not? We built something extraordinary. Not just the ranch, but a life, a family, a legacy that will outlast both of us." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while Grace worked a young horse in the corral, and Thomas tended to the cattle in the near pasture. The mountains rose eternal around them, and the land they had fought for spread out in all its hard-won beauty. "I love you," Willa said, simple words that carried the weight of everything they had been through together. "I love you too. Yesterday, today, and every tomorrow we have left." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Willa thought about that young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with 2 suitcases and a dream. She thought about the town that had expected her to fail, about the man who had chosen to stand beside her instead, and about the journey that had transformed them both. She had come to Colorado seeking independence and found partnership instead. She had expected to fight alone and discovered the strength that comes from fighting together. She had wanted to prove herself to a doubting world and ended up inspiring a generation of women to reach for their own impossible dreams. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, she knew. Henry would take over eventually, bringing new ideas while honoring the foundation his parents had built. Grace would have her horse ranch, and Thomas would find his own path. And somewhere, other young women would hear the story of Willa Whitmore, who became Willa Foster, who refused to fail when the world expected nothing else, and they would find courage in that telling. But those were future stories. Today, there was work to be done, grandchildren to spoil, cattle to tend, and a life to live alongside the man who had made all of it possible. As they stepped onto the porch of their home, built sturdy and strong through years of effort and love, Willa felt a deep contentment settle over her. She had come west chasing a dream of freedom and self-sufficiency. What she found was something far better, a partnership built on mutual respect and love, a family that carried forward her values, and a community that had learned to see strength in unexpected places. The town had expected her to fail, but Ethan had stood beside her until she became everyone's inspiration. And that, Willa thought as Ethan pulled her close for a kiss on their sun-warmed porch, was the best story anyone could ask for.